What would I worry about? I worry about holding gold. That's, if you're asking me what do I fear, I don't fear anything if I actually have the superior asset. If I was a gold holder, I would fear.
In today's video, Michael Saylor, Executive Chairman of MicroStrategy, discusses Bitcoin ordinals, transaction costs, MicroStrategy's long-term vision, and the future of money.
What scares you the most about Bitcoin adoption? Because if there was no opportunity, if there's no risk, there won't be an opportunity, and vice versa. What scares you the most?
I don't really see anything that scares me. I think Bitcoin has crossed the event horizon. 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been concerned that ignorance in the political sphere would cause some powerful politician to want to ban it. Right? I mean, if you look at the ladder of Bitcoin appreciation, people start at the bottom rung, which is the Bitcoin denier, and they think Bitcoin is tulip bulbs or Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, and it's like the Peter Schiff denial, and we're way beyond that. And then they move to the next level, which is Bitcoin skeptic. Bitcoin is a digital commodity. It works. You can send value between two parties without a trusted intermediary. It's an innovation, but it's too good to be true, and the government's going to ban it. Right? Lots of people said that about 2 years ago. I mean, Ray Dalio said that. Jamie Dimon said that. Larry Fink kind of implied that. It used to be that there were a lot of very powerful, successful either politicians or powerful, successful money managers that were skeptics. And in the last 24 months, those skeptics have been largely silenced. When the head of the CFTC says Bitcoin's a digital commodity and we're going to support it, and when the head of the SEC says Bitcoin is a digital commodity, we're going to support it, and when the head of the Central Bank of Europe and the Central Bank of the United States say, yeah, it's a digital asset, we recognize it, we're not going to block it, we're not moving against it. When the government says, well, we need to embrace it. When you have 4 political candidates, 4. Do you know in the history of the United States, I don't think there's ever been an example where you had 4 political candidates running for president endorsing a new asset. I mean, it would be similar to, I guess, if you had the leading Republican and the leading Democratic candidate saying, we think every American deserves to own their own home, and we're going to sponsor legislation to make it cheap and easy for them to own their own home. Maybe something like that, right? But it's sort of up there. So at this point, it's kind of hard to say that skeptics are winning the day, right? The skeptics are being shouted down. They're out of the mainstream. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Times, CNBC, a bunch of senators, a bunch of Congress persons, the head of the Senate Finance Committee or the House Finance Committee. I think they all acknowledge that Bitcoin is here to stay. In fact, Jerome Powell just yesterday, right, was asked this point blank in congressional testimony and said, yeah, I think it's not going away. So I don't worry about the skeptics. Now we're just at the stage where you're either an investor, where you think, oh, it's an asset, maybe I'll buy it, maybe I'll short it, maybe it's overvalued, undervalued, I'll just trade it. I'm a trader. Or you're a technocrat. That's like, it's the dominant digital monetary network. It's 100 times more powerful than the next proof of work network. It's indestructible. It's like the Apple of money or the Google of digital money. So I think I'll just get on this one, on for the ride, because it's destined to 10x from here and nobody can stop it. And then the final layer you get to, if you spend enough time studying this, is you become a maximalist. And to be clear, here's what a maximalist means. It doesn't mean that every nation state will fail. It doesn't mean that we won't have currencies like the yen and the dollar and the peso and the yuan and the euro. It doesn't mean that people won't invest in real estate or in Apple stock or Google or in natural gas fields. It doesn't mean that there won't be other companies creating new stuff. It doesn't mean there won't be art. It doesn't mean there won't be digital art. It doesn't mean all these other things. What it means is you think that Bitcoin is an instrument of economic empowerment to the world. It means that you believe it's not just the dominant digital monetary network or the dominant digital property network, if you want. You can call it digital money, you can call it digital property, you can call it digital scarcity, you can call it a digital commodity. All those are true. And it's the dominant one because you would need 3 Earths full of electricity and every computer on Earth to interfere, and you still wouldn't beat it. That's why it's dominant. It wasn't always dominant, 10 years ago, it wasn't. You could have stopped it. But once it gets to 400 exahash, it's pretty clear that it's past the event horizon because those Bitcoin miners are 2,000 to 1 more efficient than a CPU from Amazon. And so when you've got a silicon ratchet that's 2,000x more powerful than the commodity compute power, that's what makes it, an indestructible wall of digital energy. So when you're a maximalist, you say, okay, well, it's the dominant digital network or dominant digital money network. But you would also say 8 billion people are deprived of property rights. And they don't have a bank they can trust, and they don't have scarce, desirable property. And people in Indonesia or Africa or South America, they don't have the option to buy city blocks in New York City. They can't even buy a square foot in New York City. New York City is a decent investment idea. Lots of rich people got rich by investing in New York City, but it's not the best idea. The best idea is Cyber Manhattan for everybody. So Bitcoin in that way is ethically superior to Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Alibaba, WeChat. Those are all great companies. And as a technocrat, you can invest in those because you say they're going to 10x, right? I did. I made a lot of money, invested in Apple, invested in Amazon. I said, well, they're obviously going to stomp everybody. 25,000 retailers fail. Amazon succeeds. Walmart and Target barely keep up, right? That's the story of retail in the past 20 years. So yeah, I'm a technocrat, but I don't pretend that Amazon, is the ethical solution to the problems of people in Indonesia or Nigeria. I don't even think Amazon pretends, right? Right. And Apple clearly is not the solution to people in China, and nor is Google. Google's banned in China. So Bitcoin is special because it's not a company, right? When we talk about an asset without an issuer, there's an economic implication. It's superior to a company that's a digital monopoly because there's no attack surface. The Chinese and the Europeans can target Google, Apple, and Facebook because they're not Chinese and they're not European. But you can't target a non-company that's everywhere and nowhere. There is no headquarters. There is no management team. There's no CEO to subpoena, right? So when a government in Central Africa decides to deprive all of their citizens of property rights and say, you're not allowed to have Bitcoin, well, there's no Bitcoin CEO to arrest, right? Or subpoena or put on an Interpol notice warrant on or red notice on. So Bitcoin is nation state resistant, and it is profoundly ethical because I can start a company in China that offers Bitcoin services to the Chinese, and I don't have to be Apple to do it. And I can start a company in Nigeria and a different one in Argentina and a different one in Russia and a different one in Ukraine and a different one in Siberia and a different one in fill in the blank. And the politics are going to lurch back and forth. But ultimately, the conclusion is life is pretty hopeless for billions and billions of people around the world without Bitcoin. And with Bitcoin, a poor Uber driver or tour guide in Central Africa has the same property rights as a billionaire on the Upper East Side of New York City with an army of lawyers whose brother is the governor. And you can't say that about anything else. And you're not going to be able to hold out, shares of Apple stock as the moral equivalent for the next 100 years. I don't even think, look, I have been the CEO of a publicly traded company. I'm an officer of a publicly traded company. I can't promise you what the management of my company will be like in 100 years. Or 50 years. I don't know. So Bitcoin in that regard is special. What do I worry about? I don't really worry about anything. I mean, at this point, it's just a matter of who's winning and who's losing, and how fast is this entire story going to play out, right? If you want to help your family and your friends, then you go and you advocate Bitcoin to them. Like, you want to help your country? Let's take Turkey. Okay, well, Turkey's got a problem. Their currency is collapsing. And as the currency collapses, all the people of Turkey are being impoverished. They've lost 96% of their wealth against the dollar in 20 years. They have a $20 to $40 billion balance of payments problem every year. They have $50 billion of gold. You want to solve the problems of Turkey? What worries me? Well, if I was Turkish, this would worry me, right? Sell the $50 billion of gold, buy $50 billion worth of Bitcoin. Bitcoin will go up by a factor of 4 to 5. The Turkey central bank will have $250 billion of Bitcoin. Bitcoin will appreciate anywhere from 15 to 20% a year thereafter. They will end up with a $40 billion surplus from their Bitcoin position, offsetting a $20 to $40 billion deficit from their balance of trade problem. The Turkish lira will actually turn around and strengthen. Everybody in Turkey gets rich or gets richer. They stop getting poor. The country is saved. The currency is saved. The people are saved. They start an avalanche. What would I worry about? I worry about holding gold. That's, you know, if you're asking me what do I fear, I don't fear anything if I actually have the superior asset. If I was a gold holder, I would fear that one person in Turkey would have the clarity, the conviction, and the courage to sell all the gold and buy Bitcoin. Because if that one person does that, then everybody else is going to start to copy them. The price of gold is going to crash from $1,900 an ounce down to $200 an ounce over time. Gold will approach its utility value. The monetary premium gets stripped off of it. Other nations will start to do the same thing. The nations that move first will have their currencies benefit, because instead of having your currency backed by gold, your currency be backed by Bitcoin. Your nation is backed by Bitcoin. Your nation goes on the Bitcoin standard. What happened to the African nations that kept the glass bead standard when the Europeans showed up on the gold standard? Right? The Europeans basically printed a bunch of glass beads, used it to buy everything in the African nation, enslaved everybody in Africa, owned everything, and impoverished everyone that stayed on the glass bead standard. So, is the gold standard working in Turkey? No. If it was working, the lira wouldn't be crashing, right? Is the gold standard working in China? No, they're not on the gold standard. The CNY is weak. How do you know it's weak? Because they have capital controls. If they drop the capital controls, everybody would take their money out of the CNY and the CNY would crash. So it's not really a question of worrying about Bitcoin. You ought to worry about everything else.